First line lure broke off. This one already has a wind knot. Hi, welcome to Debos Amateur Fishing. I can't even cast without messing up.
What's happening, fishing friends? Welcome to another episode. Today we're discussing something that I've received a lot of questions about, and that's more tips and tricks for spinning reels. You all know I am a huge fan of using a baitcaster, but I never ever leave home without at least one spinning combo, especially for my finesse stuff. So today I put together 5 spinning reel mistakes to avoid when you go out fishing. I know a lot of people picked up fishing this year. It's a great way to get out, enjoy the outdoors, socially distance, and for me, just absolutely clear my head of everything going on. Now, I started out with the spinning reel a long time ago when I got started in fishing, just like a lot of you all probably are right now. Probably one of the first combos you picked up or looked at was a spinning combo. So let's get into it. The first thing that I have to say, and this isn't one of the 5 tips, but I might have just broke a tip. Number 1, do not hold your spinning combo like this. You don't want to hold your spinning combo with the spinning reel up top, reeling backwards towards you. It's not very often that I tell someone, when they're fishing, you're doing something wrong or you're doing it the wrong way. That's not right. This is one of those exceptions. A spinning combo is not made to be fished with the spinning reel up. You're going to end up damaging your line guides. These guys right here, these are meant, you see how long that is? These are meant to load and take stress this way on the bottom of the rod and to bend that rod. That's the way a spinning reel is made to flex and work. Okay, the first actual tip I've got for you is filling your spool. You don't want to overfill it and put too much on, but on the other side, you also don't want to put too little amount of line on. You're going to run into issues. So number 1, filling it too full. As you can see here on my spool, there's a little ledge down here on the bottom. And that kind of lines up with this little edge right up top here. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a little lip that goes over this. When I'm filling up my spinning combo, I want to stay within about 1/8 of an inch of that lip to ensure I'm not filling it too full. If I get that line all the way out to the edge here, where it's all the way past this black where you can see and going up like it's going to run up onto the, you've got too much on there. What's going to happen is when you go to cast a few times, it's going to end up pulling a lot off because it's not seated down inside here within this spool where it's supposed to be. So you're going to get a bunch of line coming off, you're going to get line knots, a whole tangles mess. It can be an absolute horrible day. And I've done that before. I remember when I was first starting out with braid, I wanted to use the whole spool, right? You don't want to waste any of it. So I'm like, almost at the end of it, I'm like, I'm just going to keep going. When you get that all the way full, you don't have any more lip here. You don't have any more room right here. You see this black lip on the bottom? If I were to put line all on all this and fill up all that black down there, it's all just going to come off in a big ball. And that's what happens. Now on the other side of that, you don't want to put too little of line on here. Now if I do this where there's like a finger's width, like a 1/2 inch, and that line's all the way in toward the middle, you're going to lose a lot of casting distance, because what's going to happen is as that line's coming off, the fuller you have it, the farther of cast you'll get. As that line starts to get down and it starts to eat inside there, it's going to bang up against the top of this. It's going to spin off more. It has to do more work, and you're just not going to get as good of a cast. So if you put on too much, it can be issues. You're going to have line coming off and tangling. If you don't put on enough, it's going to be hard to cast a long distance, especially if you want to like pitch and flip. A lot of times I'll have a Ned rig or a little finesse jig and throw it out there, and line will just come off real easy if you've got that right amount on. If you don't have enough on there, you're going to throw it out, it's going to bang around, and it's just not going to be easy to do. So fill your spool correctly. I've got a whole other video on this. I'll link that at the end, but getting this within the right spot is key. Okay, tip number 2 for beginners is don't neglect braid. The more I've got into spinning and fishing a spinning combo, really braid is my number 1 thing that I use. You do have to learn to tie a leader, fluorocarbon or monofilament, unless you're fishing really dirty. But with a little practice, it's not a problem at all. Now, the benefits of braid, why do I stress that? Why should you not neglect braid? Well, a lot of new people I know, when they start out, they get a nice combo like this, they go out and they'll look for a cheap line, right? I don't know what I'm doing, I'm gonna get a cheap line. The problem is a lot of those cheap lines can kind of be stiff, or maybe you've heard the pros talk about fluorocarbon, so you put 12-pound fluorocarbon on here thinking it's gonna be great. The problem with some monos, and most all fluorocarbon, is they're tough, they've got memory, and when you go to cast, they're gonna have that memory and wanna jump off the spool. So the things that you get with braid is you don't have any memory. Like you can see here, braid on your line is always going to be straight. So this is straight and dropping down. I know it's not focusing the greatest, but this has been on here for a long time. This has been on all year. Notice how it's limp. There's no sort of memory in it whatsoever. That's the number 1 advantage of spinning combos with braid. you don't have any memory. You don't have to worry about whole globs of it coming off unless you filled it too full. But generally it's nice and smooth like this. It's gonna be a real small diameter as well. So a 10-pound or 15-pound, some braids even, are gonna equal like a 4-pound monofilament diameter. So a 15-pound braid could be the exact same size, same diameter as a 4-pound mono. That's crazy. The smaller diameter line is going to come off you real easier. You're going to be able to cast it a whole lot farther than if you're using like a thick 12-pound fluorocarbon on here. You just get more distance. It's way easier and more forgiving for a beginner. The other thing I've noticed is it doesn't want to twist as easily. Fluorocarbon, it's going to have that memory and it's going to be trained to your reel, right? As soon as you get it all on the spool, it's going to be trained to the size of the spool and it's going to want to keep going on that way. Braid doesn't care, it has no memory. So if I'm using a lure that can kind of tend to twist, or like a Senko or something like that, man, the twisting and the kinks and stuff that you get in your line, you'll oftentimes see it like come back all like this, twisted up like this and hanging around. That's when you get a lure that's gonna cause line twist. So braid doesn't twist up as easy, it's more forgiving, it's a lot more limp. It's just a lot easier for a beginner to get used to. Now, if you get a knot in it, it can be a heck of a thing to get out and sometimes you might have to cut it, but in my opinion, if you start with a real soft mono or braid, you'll really like it. Okay, tip number 3, I can't stress enough, close the bail manually. What do I mean? Well, you take your line, you go like this, you're holding it with your finger, you cast it out, and to close the bail, you're just taking your hand right here on the crank and the handle and closing it that way. I know a lot of new people start out that way. I certainly did when I was first starting. Now, if you're using a lure that's got some weight to it, a cast and retrieve lure, it's not gonna be as big of an issue. A lure with weight, you're casting it out almost as soon as it's hitting the water, you're clicking that over and reeling. It's gonna take up that slack without much of an issue. The problem you're gonna get into is when you fish lures that you move with the rod. So for example, like a Ned rig, a drop shot, a finesse jig, a small shaky head. A lot of things that I'm picking up a spinning combo to use, I'm working with the rod, using the rod to work the lure and not the reel. So let's say I had like a small spinnerbait, 1/4 ounce spinnerbait, and I was fishing on this, not an issue, right? You cast it out, you turn it over with the handle, no problem. Let's say I have a Ned rig. I throw a Ned rig out, I'm letting it sink, I've got a bunch of extra slack line, and I just turn that crank over, right? I turn it over and I've got a whole bunch of loose line here. What you'll end up seeing is it'll look something like this. Have you ever seen that on your spinning reel? See that line, how it's all loose and starting to get around the bottom of the bail? Well, if it gets really bad and you've got a big loop or a lot of loose line, it'll get up under that bail. I'm sorry, under your spool. If you've got a ton of slack, it can get caught up and under there. You've got to take your spool off, remove it, fix it, can get caught in the gear in there. Otherwise, with all this loose line, something's gonna happen. And usually what's gonna happen with all that loose line kind of hanging out down here is on that next cast, you go out and throw it out, and it's gonna pull a whole bunch of this off in that one spot and ball and knot up. That's what people call a wind knot, right? Now, a wind knot, you'll also get those, again, that balling and bunching up a line if you fill your spool too full, okay? Or anytime you're casting out slack line. So if I were to cast this out, most of the time, I guarantee I'm gonna have some issues coming back. So the big thing with closing the bail manually, and what I mean is, notice in this clip how I casted it out, look at my left hand. My left hand is going down, flipping that bail over with my hand, and then I'm pulling out that slack line. That's what I want to urge beginners to do is you take back, you throw your line out. I'm actually gonna get into that in a second, but I'm putting my hand here. I'm gonna take my free hand over, flip that bail with my hand, and I pull out any sort of slack. That's what I get into, and that really helps save a ton of headaches. Really, Stubbs? He had to get his toy. That saves a ton of headaches when you get out on the water, because I can't tell you how frustrated I've been, starting out, cast it out, there's a big knot, glob of line, you're like, what the heck? Closing that bail manually, and that's actually gonna take us into the next tip. Now this kind of ties into tip 3. I've already kind of talked about it in tip 3, but I can't stress enough reeling up that slack line. If there's wind, anytime you've got slack after throwing out a bait and you're letting it drop down, anytime you've got that slack line where it's just kind of hanging, you don't ever want to reel that in. So one thing you can do is you can take your finger on the line like this while you're reeling in. That gives tension on it. You can also, like I do almost every time, I notice going back and watching video, every time I cast out and close the bail with my hand, you'll always see me take this line right here in front of the reel and pull it out to make sure everything's nice and tight. And then I'll usually start working it with my rod with my tip up while the line's tight, and I'm gonna reel the slack down. Do not reel up slack, loose line. That's gonna put loops in it. Just as if you weren't closing the bail with your hand, it's gonna put those loose loops in, and that's when you get wind knots. Tip number 4 is feathering the line. Now, that's one of my biggest pros to using a bait caster is when I take this bait caster and cast it out, I've got to put my thumb here. So my thumb's always touching this line. As it's getting out there closer to the water, I can feather the spool with my thumb, slow that spool down, stop that inertia, and kind of let that lure come in gently, right? That's my biggest thing with a bait caster is I'm a lot more accurate with it. You have more control over the spool and the line. One thing I've learned to do with the spinning reel is kind of the same thing, feathering the line. Now there's different ways to do this. I know some guys will use their finger, so as this line's coming off, it's gonna bang into my finger here, right? So they'll keep a finger down and let it hit that. That's not how I do it, but I've heard of guys doing it that way. I always use my free hand to feather my spool. So I go here, I cast it out, and as this line's coming off, remember it's coming off this way, okay? It's coming off around like this. I'm just gonna leave my finger down here and let it hit. It's just gonna cause a little bit of friction on it. But with practice, you'll be able to feather this as it's coming off. I'm just putting my hand here as this line's coming off. I can't really show you, I'll show you a clip. So I know a lot of people will cast out and they're holding this and looking to time it, and it's gonna cause the lure to bounce back, right? When you're feathering the spool, you can get it right to about where you want it and just barely lay your hand on it and allow that lure to come in. Now, I'm still, even after feathering a spinning reel, I'm still not as accurate with this as I am with this. That's a whole different video though, but feathering the spool with your hand is something you want to learn. It'll help you out a ton. You're gonna get a lot more accuracy. You're gonna be able to get into spots like if you're pitching and flipping with the spinning reel, a lot quieter. Sometimes that subtle presentation with the bait makes all the difference. If you go into a spot where fish are a little spooky and you throw it in there and it splashes with a big splash, those fish are gone. You can land it in there nice and soft. Feathering the spool helps. Okay, the last tip, tip number 5 for beginners is make sure you set your drag. Now this is gonna be kind of a fight and feel type thing. I know when I started out at first, I would have my drag cranked up. So on a spinning reel, your drag's gonna be right here, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. So if I'm turning it this way, I'm gonna loosen it. If I'm turning it clockwise, I'm gonna tighten it. Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. So when I started out, I would have that cranked down a lot. And what happens is if you're using real small diameter line, let's say I'm using 4-pound monofilament, if you have this cranked all the way down, you're fighting a big fish, you're gonna end up breaking line. So you kind of have to get into that comfort zone where you feel, I've got enough power to set the hook. Okay, you might let a little drag out, that's what I want. When I set the hook, I want just a little bit to come out, okay? But when I'm fighting that fish, I don't want it going bzzz. And of course, on the other side of things, I don't want to have it set so tight that there's no give. The whole point of drag is it's allowing that fish to take some line. If you're using treble hook lures or smaller lures, it's gonna allow that fish not to throw it, right? Because he's pulling out drag instead of putting slack in the line. When they head shake, any sort of slack line is when they can throw that lure. So for smaller hooks, if I've got this set all the way tight and they can't pull out any drag, right? They're pulling and this isn't making any sound. They can't pull out any drag, good chance you're gonna bend a small hook. Setting your drag appropriately. And I like to, like I said, have it so if I've got something where I'm setting a hook hard, like a shaky head or something, you'll hear just a little bit come out, okay? And then I can adjust it on the fly. If he's really pulling, I can loosen this up and let him take some of that drag and fight. Wear that fish out until he starts to get tired and bring him in. That's the whole point in fighting a fish with drag. Okay, let it play out some of that, you know, piss and vinegar is what we call it, until they're all tired, and then you can get them in a lot easier. So there's a number of things with the drag. Like I said, a lot of it's just gonna take a little bit of time, but you don't wanna have it set so tight that it's gonna throw hooks or you're bending hooks or you're breaking line. If you're doing that, you know you've got it set too tight. So that's gonna do it for the 5 spinning reel mistakes. If you avoid those, I guarantee it's gonna help you out in the long run. Number 1, not filling that spool too much or not putting enough line on. Number 2, don't neglect braid. I know it does cost a little bit more, but as you get more comfortable with it, braid has so many more benefits. Casting distance, it's got a smaller diameter. It's really nice. Number 3, close that bail manually. Try to get out of the habit of casting and just using this to click it over. It's abrupt, it can pop line. When you close that bail manually, you've got full control. Number 3.5, Don't reel in slack line, it's bad. Number 4, feather the line on the spool. Get used to it, it helps a ton. You get a lot more control. I know a lot of people with the spinning reel, they cast it out and wherever it's going, and they're closing it, right? You can feather the spool just like you do on one of these guys, just take some practice. And number 5, make sure you get that drag set up. Like I said, it's gonna take some time and learning, but utilizing that drag, just don't leave it at one setting for every lure, every hook. Don't be afraid to change that up, even while you're fighting a fish, changing it up. All right, that's gonna do it for me tonight. Tonight's subscribed fishing friend is Daniel Crocker. Daniel, thanks for watching, and thanks everybody else who continues to watch and support. It means a bunch. I'm creeping up on 100,000 subscribers, and I never dreamed that would even be possible. So it's because of all of you, but let me know. Let me know if this vid helps. I've got more planned like this, some more tips and trick type things, a couple unboxings, some more reviews. I've got a bunch of stuff, so I always love hearing your input. That's enough. I gotta go edit. So thank you all for watching. Oh yeah, remember, embrace the dink. Till next time.